All right, fellas. Hey, it's Wayne here, and got a special December Man Makers code for you guys. We got our great friend Jamie Winship on, and some of you guys are on live, but I know a lot of you guys are just watching the recording. But I know this is gonna, bring tremendous value for you guys. We've talked a lot about, knowing your guys' true identity and being able to walk fearless in who you are and what you're called to do, and just so much of what the Winships have poured into Bethany and I's lives the last 18 months when we started to be able to stalk them and be at things that they were doing and take notes. And I got my journal here, so hopefully you guys have your journal as well. And so for Jamie, all the guys that are watching this live, but also watching the recording, they're all business guys. One thing about them all is they are all wanting to grow. They want to get better. They want to be challenged. And they're all, kind of like the men's event I had you at last year. That's the type of guys these guys are all at. So you can let us have it with whatever's stirring in you. And so go ahead and take it away, and I'll mute myself too and let yourself introduce yourself. So thanks for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good to be here. Good to be with all of you. So just by way of background, briefly, grew up in DC, Washington, DC, wanted to be a police officer since I was 14, went to college, met who was going to be my wife there, graduated from college, went into the police academy, graduated, married her, started my police career, which I loved every minute of it. And then in my fifth year, at the end of my fifth year, got a phone call from the U.S. government, the Central Intelligence Agency. Went to meet with them. They were working a certain scenario. They were looking for creative ways to think through the scenario. I was one of the candidates that they contacted through their process of finding people. And when I went to meet with that operations guy, he gave me the scenario they were working, asked me what I would do in that scenario. I thought a little bit, and then I gave my answer. He was very, very fascinated with the process of how I came up with my solution, which I sort of was able to articulate, not super well, but I could do it. And the reason they were interviewing me was based on my cases that I had worked as a police officer. They had all the cases that I had worked for 5 years, and they were asking me, how did you work this? How did you do this? Gave me the scenario. I answered the scenario, and then they just offered me a job right on the spot. So so I said yes immediately to the offer. We had to work out a lot of details of that. Took more than 2 years to work through how that was going to look, but basically left the police department and then spent the next really 27 years overseas after that. So left the U.S. in 1990, really finished in 2017, the beginning of 2017, finished completely working in different countries. And then relocated to Seattle area. And my burden is to see an entire U.S. city transformed by the kingdom of God, which hasn't happened maybe in the history of the U.S., depending on your definition of that. But so that's why we're here. That's what we're doing in our little company called Identity Exchange, is committed to that. So that's my background. And that's how we got to where we're sitting right now. So
talk to these guys about, where did you first tap into this, knowing your true identity. And I guess the thing that was most fascinating to me when I met you is, I had this US centric American view of wait, you could talk to a Muslim person about Jesus.
Yeah.
You could talk to this, how did this process unfold where you guys were able to do what you did? And that's kind of the excitement for us, is it's knocked on our head about, wow, how we can really impact people here.
Yeah. So that's a process and that we went through, but so in the police department, my question in the police department was, how do I, as a believer, impact people using my vocation as a police officer without getting fired? That was it. because our general orders were that you're not allowed to talk about faith, religion, anything like that while on duty to anybody. And but my commitment to God was, I'm going to do it. I'm going to use my vocation for the kingdom, but I'm not anxious to get fired. So my question to God was, is there a way to share my faith like effectively in situations when I'm acting as a police officer that actually enhances my career rather than kills it or gets my sergeant in trouble or gets the police department sued? So there's no training manual on that. No, I never heard that topic discussed in church or anywhere I'd ever been. So it came down to, as I read the Bible and stuff, the people in scriptures were just, seems like they could hear God. They would ask specific questions, and they would, in their communication, in their prayer life, whatever, they could come up with answers and tactical decisions. So I just started, in the course of my police career, asking God, like, can you give me an idea right now that would be different than what the general orders say? Because what the general orders say either don't apply to this or they don't work. So is there another way to think about this scenario? And I just practiced what I call hearing from God, which was basically entertaining new ideas about police work. And so I would just experiment with that, and I would try stuff and it would work, and I would try stuff and it wasn't a good idea. And I would just, till I could really refine, what is the voice of God? What is my voice? How do I know? And I made, I got promoted for it. So it obviously works in real life. And then, and so that's what got me the interview with the CIA was that really, that whole question of how are you coming up with these ideas that you're having? How are you doing that? Is it a process that you can teach? Can you do it anywhere? Can you do it in the Muslim world? And I said, yes, because I didn't know what that meant actually, but I just said, sure. And so I ended up in the Muslim world in 1990, and very quickly learned that the language I was using even in the police department in the US was not the language I could use with Muslims in their country, in their context. And my job was to work with militant groups. So not just Muslims, but Muslims who were upset with the world. And so then again, it was like, what language can I use because I knew only the gospel would actually bring transformation into the scenarios I was in. But in what way could I talk about the kingdom of God to a group of Muslims who hated everything Christian, West, all of it? Was there a way to figure out how to do that? So again, it was, back into the Gospels, back into asking God, how do I share the kingdom with people that can't hear it the way I've been taught to say it? And again, I made mistakes. I got arrested and put on trial in an Islamic court for something I said that I shouldn't have said. So you learn the hard way. But in that whole process, I kept asking God, okay, what do you want me to know? What do you want me to do? What do you want me to understand about what just went wrong? And what do you want me to do about it? And I slowly learned, if you're going to talk about the gospel, you have to use language that the Muslim can recognize and understand as good and valuable, and not something that's going to try and attack and convert. So that was the process of doing that. And then this is the beauty of like having other men in your life, is I would always run into people at key times that knew more than I did. And they would be in the weirdest places. And so in about our 5th year in working in Indonesia, the Muslim guys that I was working with would talk about this one. They never called him an American. They called him a foreigner or a God follower. They used this interesting language to describe him. They never called him an American, and they never called him a Christian. But they said he's a foreigner. He's white, they would say, and he follows God. And they loved him. They revered him. And and they would talk about Jesus, because he would talk. So then I what is this guy doing that I have never heard of before? So eventually I found him, I located him. It was funny. It was kind of like Apocalypse Now. It was like this weird foreign guy somewhere up in the islands, they used to say, that the people loved, that was by himself. So it took a while to find him, but I finally located him and met with him. And he was, he was just in Seattle like 6 months ago, passing through, and he's just like the coolest guy to this day. He's like 10 years older than me, but so he had been in the country 15 years, and I was in my 5th or 6th year, and I met with him, and I said, you got to, I want to know what you know. And so then we became this mentoring. He didn't want to work with me at all. He told me every time I asked him, he's like, I don't have time for you. You're a waste of my time. You're just going to debate me on stupid theology. I don't have time for this. I'm here for the Muslims. And I would just keep going back and asking him, and eventually he relented. And so I spent 4 years with him all over the world, really, going with him into crazy, volatile situations, and just learning everything I could from him. He was a big time follower of Christ, but just different than anything I'd ever seen before. Just very different. And he had a much more expansive view of God. He had a much greater sense of God's power than I did, and he was super creative. He kept saying to me, "You got to use the mind of Christ. You have to use the mind of Christ." And then probably the most powerful time was we were together. We'd been working together for a couple of years, and he was watching. Because it's funny, because I say this to his face all the time. I can do better than him what he did. Once he trained me, I could do it better than him, which is the goal, right? You learn from the person, and then you do it better than they do it, or you add your own thing to it. And so he was watching me, and he interrupted me when talking to this Muslim, and he goes, you have no idea who you really are, do you? And I took offense at that, and I said, what does that mean? He said, you don't have any sense of your own identity, do you? And I said, how do you know that? How do you know that? And he said, because you're just imitating me. He said, we don't need me. I'm already here. We don't need another me. We need you, but we don't know who you are, and you don't know who you are, so we don't know what to do with you. You need to know your own identity in the kingdom. Then you can tell us what it is, and then we would know what to do with you. But you don't know your identity. And it really hurt my feelings, but I knew he was right. I knew all I was doing basically was trying to find models and imitate them, which is an okay way to start, but you don't want to stay that way. You want to develop your own unique identity and voice. And so he sent me to another guy that taught me about identity, and then led me through what they called identity prayer back then. And that just absolutely blew me away. So it was this progression through the police department, learning how just to hear God. And then at that time in my life, okay, now that I know God speaks and I can hear God and it's normal and it's not whacked out and weird, then what are the kinds of things I need to hear from God? And I had never thought about asking God about identity. It just never occurred to me. But then when I went back and read in the Old and New Testament, it's everywhere where God's giving identity to people. It's everywhere where they're in the wrong identity, they're thinking the wrong way, and God speaks the truth about who they really are, because the identity that they believe about themselves is actually false. Because where we get our identity from is the world, what we have, what we do, and what people think about us. When you're getting your identity from those things, it's never true. And it never allows you to be fully alive and fully free. You're just trapped in the cycle of what do I have, what do I do, and what do people think of me? Instead of, none of that really matters. What matters is, who are you in the kingdom, and what do you do? What does your identity do? How does it show itself? And so holiness in the kingdom of God means the way of your being, what you do, matches the truth of your being, who you are. They're in perfect sync. That's what holiness is in Scripture. We've turned it into this moralistic viewpoint of things, but to be holy means you're whole, W-H-O-L-E, whole. And to be righteous means that what you do it's what's right. It's what's right for you, and it's what's right for me in line with God and who God is. And God makes things right by making things whole. So once I understood that, it's like this progression of getting better and better at what you do. Then I started to talk to Muslims, not so much about what is Islam and what is Christianity, but who are they as people? Like, what was their identity? And I learned that Muslim is not an identity, Christian is not an identity, white is, all these are not identities. They're names of teams. And so once I stopped doing the team competition with them and started talking to them just as people who didn't know who they were, wow, it was dramatic, the effect it had on them, how hungry they were to know that kind of truth.
Hey, Jamie, just a question there, because I mean, that's awesome. I know there's like so many things we could go down, but like one of the common things in just like the Western Christian church, like if I'm talking to someone, they say, my identity is Christ. Like, I'm a son of God, like I'm adopted in. So it's like, but it's like, that's great, right? But it's very broad.
Exactly.
So kind of talk us through that, because I think that's like a very common identity when I'm talking to people, which they're like, I got it. I'm this. But it's like, oh, there's so much more. Like, let's crack this thing open.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, so if we know that as we embrace Christ, that we're sons and daughters, and that if any man's in Christ, he's a new creation. The old has passed away, the new has come. And that newness is you're in the family, you're in the kingdom, you're a believer, you're born again, all of that. But what's the new? So like even more specifically, so I know that I'm a child of God, that I'm a new creation, but God has gone to great lengths to demonstrate to all of us how unique we each are, with fingerprints, with the way we look. God never makes things the same. Nothing that's ever been made is like exactly like the other thing. He's very big on the uniqueness of each and the beauty of each. And so, and as Paul said, in my mother's womb, I was called to the Gentiles. Like Paul's saying that his identity beside the broad is like, yeah, we're in the kingdom, we're children of God, we're all of that thing. But then more specifically, okay, but yeah, as a child of God, but what's your unique identity? What are you that's never been before and never will be again? Why did God take the time to knit you together in your mother's womb if you're just going to be a general creation like that? So it's like saying I'm an American. Big deal. I mean, so there's whatever there is, 350 million Americans. It's like, that doesn't mean anything actually. Like, who are you? Well, I'm a white American. Those are so general and broad. If the question is, God, when you knit me together in my mother's womb, what do you call me? What's the identity of that unique human that we would say is why we don't, why we believe in the sanctity of life, because every life is unique and beautiful. And it's not just, there's another child of God, or there's another daughter of the king. It's more specifically, no, that person, that work right there, that creation, that masterpiece is unique among all things God's ever done. And we want to know what that is, because the journey to knowing who you actually are is endless, and it is amazing to love God and love your neighbor in the same way that you love yourself. You can't love someone you don't know. So if you don't know yourself, you'll get your identity from other things, and you won't love yourself in the healthy way. You'll be self-promoting and self-protecting this vague identity.
Okay. Oof. There's a lot in there. I mean, I think at some point it'd be cool to have you walk through these guys through there's a smaller group, so it's good. And then the guys watching the recording, we could walk through just that identity process. Sure. But from like a little bit higher level, like when they have their identity and they're on mission, like you were in like life and death situations. So kind of like throw more fuel on the fire of just being able to just have absolute fearlessness of like, I know when I'm working in my identity, God has my back. So I'm either going to be in heaven with him, or I'm going to complete the mission. Like, talk through some of those things
Right. Well, yeah. So what makes us fearless I like to distinguish between brave and fearless. Brave is, you might be brave in a situation where you just don't have an option. You know, you're just reacting sort of instinctively to fight, to protect. Courage or the fearlessness is what is thought out. It's in a situation where you have long term, like, to think about, we could die in this scenario, or this could blow up in our face. And so you need this sort of slow burn, blue hot kind of understanding that doesn't go up and down and just react to scenarios. So to do that, you have to know who you are. So it's like, if I'm going into a scenario and I don't know who I am, I'm not super clear on what God's going to do with me, because I don't know who I am. So it's like, if you're going into a game and you're a player on a team, but you don't know what position you play, it's pretty hard to know what the coach is going to ask you to do. So the more clearly I know my identity, even without praying, I can look at a situation and go, that's not me. I don't belong in that scenario. So the more you understand your identity in the kingdom, you make less and less false starts, because you realize that was never me, ever. I was lured into it by whatever. But when you know who you are, you just look at that and you go, I don't do that. Or that is all me. And we go in 100%. So that the way that worked out in the scenarios we were in is so, like, my identity in the kingdom, the name that God calls me is militant peacemaker. That's generally it. So even when I'm looking at vocational offers, if the offer doesn't involve pretty serious conflict where I'm being invited into the conflict, I know not to take the job. It doesn't matter how much the salary is. It doesn't matter the geographic location. What matters is my identity what is needed in that vocation, that scenario. If it is, and I know it is, I don't care what the salary is. I know two things. One, it doesn't matter, because God will take care of that part. But two, I also have learned really well that I'm really successful in a certain scenario, and that if I'm in that scenario, I get promoted. It works because I just know I know that room really well. So it's like, if you seek first the kingdom, the rest of it comes, but it's not magic. It's like, I'm the person, I know this scenario. You put me in it, we're going to win. And you put me in it, and if I die in that situation, I still win. I can't lose in the scenario where my identity is called forward. That's how we look at it. So I'll just give you, the one that's most common that I use is because it's dramatic, but it's really not. So I'm sent into a scenario where I'm supposed to locate a certain bad guy. And so we're very tactical, and I pray, like, okay, God, this is this job. This is what we need to accomplish. We need to find this guy. We need to, make contact with him. We need to have an opportunity to pour into him his terrorist tendencies and see if he'll listen to the kingdom and transform out of it. So that's the goal. So I work, I'm not in a Christian organization. I'm working for government officials. But my job, what I'm known for is helping a person transform their viewpoints without using violence or monetary incentives or anything. It's just an interaction between us where they're really transformed by God. Even though the guys that hire me wouldn't use that terminology because they don't agree with it, but they still know this works. It's really beautiful, actually. It's funny. But I know the scenarios when they're pitching, like, we have to get this person and it's going to involve this. Then I'm like, yeah, that's exactly my identity. Put me in the game. Put me in that play, and give me the ball. I just know it. Because I've had the ball in other places weren't my position and I got killed. I lost. But these scenarios I know. So we set up we come up with an idea. We set up the scenario. I make contact with the guy and his number 2 guy, which is even better. And they're in a class that I'm teaching in the Middle East. I come out of the class one night late. I stayed later than the students. And these guys drive up in a car. There's these 2 guys and 2 more guys, and 4 of them in a car. And they pull up to me on the curb. I'm waiting for a taxi, and they say, it's late at night, and they say, we want to give you a ride home. Get in the car. Well, a year before that, our whole team in Baghdad in a car were killed, all of them. And so that's in my mind. Like, in our job, you never get in a car with anyone that you don't know. And even when it's all your own people in a car, if you get stuck in a traffic jam, there's a good chance you're going to die. So we work on all these scenarios of get out of the car, don't sit in the car in a traffic jam, don't get in a car with someone you don't know. And so here they are, 4 of them, inviting me into the car. So in my mind, in my reactionary mind is like, no, it's just an absolute, trained in every way, every red flag, do not get in that car. So that's my sort of reptilian self just responding. This is dumb. I'll walk away. I'll get them another night. We'll come back another night. However, the difference between me and just a well-trained person in my position who would definitely walk away from that scenario just to get to a more advantageous time is I'm a believer. And so I think that I can ask God what to do, and I can think through it without fear, without self-protection and self-promotion. So the guys are like, hey, you want to ride home? Immediately my brain is like, nope, I'm not, no way. But I'll see you guys another time, whatever. But then I can separate from that into my intuitive mind, into the spirit, into the mind of Christ, and say, God, you know me, you know the scenario, you know what's going on. I don't know everything that's happening here. It looks to me like this is not a time I would get in the car with these guys for lots of reasons. But what do you want me to know? And what do you want me to do? And this is how people in the Bible pray. This is how they do it. And as in Scripture, the Lord doesn't say what you think. He's very unconventional, God, as you read. And so very clear in my mind is the idea to get into the car with them. And it's very strong. And the reason I know it's not me is because I've already made my decision. I'm not doing it. But this is a counter idea. And so then just to be careful, I ask again, just to make sure that God's not making a mistake or that he's misreading the situation as we think God does. I said, do you really want me to get in this car? And very strongly, I sense, yeah, I need to get in the car. So people are saying, how do you know it's God and not you? Listen, if it was me, I would already have been gone. I'm sure it's not the enemy, because I don't think the enemy only God would say something like this. So I volunteered to get in the car. They put me in the back seat between 2 guys. It's like getting into a coffin. I'm getting in the back seat between these 2 guys. They ask me where I live. I tell them the direction. I don't want them to know exactly where I live, but I point, and then they turn around and go the opposite way and out of the city, out into the desert. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. This is terrible. And this is a whole deeper practice and a longer training, but the key is to stay in the present tense. See, my mind's tendency is to get ahead of what they're doing, and I'm already being executed somewhere. That's called, future casting or hypothetical projection, and they produce fear. Well, God only works in the present tense. So God is just like, look, you're not dead. You're in the car. They're driving into the desert. Nothing's happened yet. Don't get into the future and get out of the past. Stay present tense. And the guy in the front seat turns around and he looks at me, the guy that's the guy I want. He says to me, we know who you are and we know what you do, and we're taking you out in the desert to put you on trial and execute you. What do you think of that? He wanted to know what I thought of that. And so again, how much distance I can put between the situation and my ability to think with God is critical. If I'm just reacting out of fear or whatever, self-protection, self-promotion, I don't have time to listen to God explain to me what's happening. And the Lord's quite quick on this stuff. And so I asked God, what do I think? What do I think? What do I say to this guy as this thing plays out? And the 2 thoughts, again, in my mind that were counter to typically how I would respond were tell him that you're not afraid of him and that you want to be his friend, which are both, not true. I was afraid and I didn't like him at all. The interesting thing about that is that's what faith is. Faith is the substance of things you hope for. It's the evidence of things not seen yet. So people say, oh, you have so much faith. That's not true. I'm it's like I said to the Lord, I don't like him and I am afraid. And the Lord said, well, this is for the future. You know, this is an act of faith. Say that you're not afraid and watch yourself be calm, not afraid. Right? Like, let's act like we're not afraid, and that's faith. And so I said to the guy, I'm not afraid, and I want to be your friend. As soon as I said it, I felt more courage. As soon as it came out of my mouth, I felt more courageous. And I watched, there was just a switch in the car. There was just a change in the atmosphere in the car. And it was like it became brighter somehow. And the guy smiled at me. And I knew I had answered wrongly. I didn't answer the way he expected, which caused him to react differently than what he was thinking. So it was like a chess game that the enemy was playing and God was playing. And the guy, you know, the bad guy, he's just acting out of his own fear. He's afraid of what I represent, so he's going to kill me, and that's the way wars continue. But I didn't react to the fear aspect of it, and that it made him think, wow, maybe there's another way to do this. And so it turned the whole situation. And he said to me, oh, you want to be my friend and you're not afraid? Okay, well, if you're not afraid of me and you want to be my friend, then we're going to take you and drop you off at your apartment, and we'll send a car tomorrow night with a driver. You bring your wife with you, get in that car with that driver, and trust that wherever that driver takes you isn't so we can execute you and your wife. If you want to be my friend and you're not afraid, let's do that. And so I said, okay. And so they turned around and they took me back into the city and dropped me off. And I told Donna what happened, and her and I had to decide. She had to decide for herself whether she was willing to go the next night. So that was her own journey. Like, my identity is mine. She can't get her identity from me. Husbands can't get identity from the wife. The wife doesn't get identity from the husband. And so I had to just wait for her to decide whether or not she was willing to go and potentially, not come out of that meeting. So we agreed together to go together, and we thought, if it ends, we'll be together. But what if it doesn't end? What if it keeps going? It would be unbelievable. And professionally, it would be off the charts. Like, I was thinking, man, if this gets pulled off, oh my gosh, we'll be a legend in our industry. And they picked us up and we went, and it did. It was amazing it was a real gathering that they were having with their wives and kids, and they brought us into it. Remarkable. And I have a picture right hanging up here of the guy kneeling down at the end of that night, serving me dinner and thanking me that I wanted to be his friend and I wasn't afraid of him. Because we began to work together in a whole other way that stopped getting his people killed and our people killed, and we became a redemptive team. So that was beautiful for the kingdom, but professionally, vocationally, for both of us, it really advanced us. So that's all. The only reason I knew to do that is because it was a conflict situation. It was a huge conflict situation. That's what I do. The Lord's like, I made you for this. Why would you walk away from it? But if it was a different situation, I would have walked away. But we say it was calling my name. And so we did it.
So along those lines, we work with people all the time. So plenty of opportunities for conflict. So,
yeah.
As we're meeting people, like what's the main route that you found that is causing people to be in that, you say, self-promotion, self-protection? Kind of dive into that and give these guys some just like high level awareness of how do you take down the conflicts between different groups, different people, all these things.
Yeah, well, we spent a lot of years figuring out specifically how to do that with Muslim people. And so, a lot of my best friends in the world are these former bad guys, and I just love them, and we've all been transformed, and we never refer to each other as Muslim, Christian, American. Those are never the identities that we refer to each other. We call ourselves by the name that God calls each one of us. It's really cool. And so that's important because it gets rid of a lot of the conflict just in that. But but over the years, and then having been back in the U.S. for 17, 18, and 19, it's really been fascinating to me, because the Muslim thing, I'm not in that context as much anymore, although we had done a lot of work with folks here, Muslim folks here. But you just kind of recognize sort of the common lies to humanity that all of us buy into, that end up with us calling ourselves Muslim or LGBT or whatever, whatever names we call ourselves. They're because we're afraid. We need those names because we're afraid and we don't have identity. So we've got to get the identity from somewhere else. But now, what we've really seen, and this is exactly what the Bible teaches. It's funny, like we discover all these things and then we go back, oh yeah, that's in the Bible. That's always what happens to us. It's like, oh yeah, that was already there. I just wasn't paying attention to it, because we read the Bible through our own fear. We're not reading the Bible in a true, when you read the Bible in a false identity, it has a limited impact. When you read it in your true identity, it's so deep you'll never find the end of it. But so here's the 2 lies all humans believe. Very simply, I can go into any room anywhere in the world at any age group. We do this all the time. Here's the 2 lies all humans believe that cause conflict in themselves, which cause conflict in the world. Lie number 1, everything in my life depends on me. That's the first lie that all humans believe pretty strongly. I don't care if they're Christian or not Christian. This is what people believe. Everything in my life depends on me. So what that means is, who's going to make me a good husband? Who's going to make me a good parent? Who's going to make me a good employee? Me. I'm going to do it. And so that is so impossible. Because then I have to think, well, I need an example of a good husband then. Well, where's an example of a good husband? And so I'll find some book or speaker, and I'll never be that person. So it's still on me. That person can't make me a good husband or a father or whatever it is you're trying to do. So that's lie number 1. Everything depends on me. It's my responsibility to become all these things. And number 2, which makes the first one deadly, the second lie we believe is, I'm not good enough to do it. So we call that a fear circle. Everything depends on me and I'm not good enough to do it. That's where all of us are. I don't care how much money you have. I don't care how poor you are. This is at the root of what most people are living with in the deep, dark night, when they're not using something to drug that truth, or, whatever we do to get rid of it, go to the gym, work hard, whatever we do to not talk about this stuff. I know if I'm in a room, and I do this all the time with big groups, little groups. I did it today with a guy. I did it yesterday with 2 guys. It's like, let's just save time. Let's just say this. What are you most afraid of? You're most afraid of everything depends on you and you're not good enough to do it. And if you're a believer in God, the third thing we wrestle with is God doesn't seem to be very helpful, right? Like, where is God? How come I believe in God and it's still all up to me, and I still, am not good enough to do any of this stuff. I still have anxiety. So those lies produce internal conflict. They produce fear, which produces internal conflict. The internal conflict can only produce external conflict. So I've either got to accept that I'm not good enough, or spend the rest of my life trying to prove that I'm good enough. Either way, you're going to be in conflict. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess tell these guys, you've talked about self-protection, self-promotion.
Right. So because my identity is false, then I have to protect and promote myself, because I may not even really like myself, but I either I'm going to just give up and go, die somewhere, or I'm going to engage and I'm going to self-protect and self-promote and self-protect and self-promote. So I'm going to get the degrees, I'm going to get the job, I'm going to prove my point, I'm going to prove who I am. And it just, that lifestyle just creates anxiety and frustration. And when I'm self-protecting and self-promoting with another person, I'm a competition to them. like then I'm become a competitor to them. So then they have to self-protect and self-promote. And so here we go. And here we are in the scarcity model world where there's not enough for everybody. So I've got to get my piece, but to get my piece, it's going to prevent you from getting your piece. And so then we're in this endless competition that we can't get out of. And so, yeah, it's just continual fear. So when I'm with a person, one thing I love to do when I'm talking with a person is just listen to the number of times they self-protect or self-promote in the conversation. You can just count them. And then I'll stop them and say, hey, why are you paying attention to how many times you say things that are you trying to protect yourself or justify things about yourself that you hate? Or you're trying to tell me how amazing you are at something. Why are you doing these things? Because a person who's secure in who they are, they don't have to do either of those things. Jesus never self-promotes and he never self-protects. He doesn't have to, because he knows who he is. And perfect love casts out all fear. So I know that God loves me. His love for me is based on the identity that he gave me that nobody else can have. So there's no comparison with anyone else. So the only goal is to live out the identity fully that he's given me, which is really pretty exciting. And because I'm the only one in that identity, I don't compete with other people. I just don't have to. Yeah. And so like last week, I was in 3 pretty intense meetings that are a lot of potential work for us. But when I go into them, it's funny, whenever I'm asking God, like, how do you want me to do this? He always says to me, just be yourself. Like, you don't need this. Don't go in there like you need this. You don't need it. Go in there like you want to bless that person, because that person that you're going to talk to is struggling with 2 things. They think everything depends on them and they're not good enough to do it. Try and help them with that. Listen for it. Try and speak into it. And when I do that with people, they want you to be around them. That's what they're like, wow, nobody ever talked to me like that. These people are far more wealthy than me and far greater in their professions than I'll ever be. But this is a new thing to them, because they're still anxious and fearful and struggling and insecure. Oh my gosh. And so basically they're saying, whatever it is that keeps you up at night, like, doesn't have to be there. So then you become a real friend to them. And like, why wouldn't they, if they're going to have someone work for them, why wouldn't they choose you versus someone that's going to come in and self-protect and self-promote with them? So it's just like, right? And so board meetings are just tough and hard and frustrating, and yeah.
So walk these guys through that identity exchange process so they can hear God's voice, and then we'll have it recorded so you guys can see it too.
Yeah. So a very simple process. Again, just so everyone knows, God's goal is not to make everything complicated and take forever. God is quite simple and basic about what's true in the world. The depth of it is profound and eternal, but the understanding of it's fairly straightforward and simple. So in identity, this is just the theme from Adam and Eve forward all through Scripture is exchanging the false for the true. That's what God always wants to do with us, is to get us to exchange what we believe that's false about ourselves, about God, and about the world, exchange it with God for him to tell us what's true about ourselves, our world, and him. And Jesus says it, you'll know and experience the truth, and then truth always will set you free. Truth brings freedom. Falsehood brings bondage. So simply the identity process is you just get alone, get quiet with the Lord, and take a couple of deep breaths, and then just ask the Lord. This is out of Psalm 139. Just ask the Lord to search you. Lord, search me and know me. Just because we want we want the Lord to tell us what we believe. We don't want to tell the Lord what we believe because, first of all, we don't tell the truth. And second of all, we don't actually know what we believe. So we're asking the Lord, Lord, would you just search me right now and know me? And would you say to me or help me say out loud names or things I believe about myself that are not from you? Okay, and you have a piece of paper there and you're going to write these things up. What are identities, names, qualities, characteristics I believe about myself that are not from God? They're from the world. They're from some teacher in third grade. They're from, an angry spouse. They're from me saying things to myself. But the way we know they're not from God is they produce in us fear, guilt, and shame. They're identities that produce fear, guilt, and shame. So what you want to do is say, Lord, what are those names that I really do believe about myself that are not from you? And just listen and just keep your mind open and just write down the first things that come to your mind. You don't have to dig for these. These will be very known to you. You're lazy. You're not a hard worker. You're a crappy husband. They'll just come out because it's what you really believe about yourself. And just write them down. This is called confession, truth telling. Just write them down. If you have 5, write 5. If you have 50, write 50. Just take your time. What else, Lord? What else do I believe about myself that's not from you? Things that hurt me, things that accuse me. Write them all down. Just don't be afraid to tell the truth. Might be painful, but it's worth it. And then when you have done that, when you're like, anything else, Lord, just anything else in there, then just use your imagination, which God has given us the gift of imagination, because all creation and discovery happens in the imagination first, and then we work it out in life, all discovery. And so in your imagination, just say, Lord, would you just give me a picture of Christ before me, of Jesus before me? The reason we ask for a picture of Jesus is because we can't see God, and Jesus is the exact representation of the invisible God. So if we want to see God, we're going to see Christ. So just, Lord, would you just give me a picture of Jesus in front of me, however that comes to you, doesn't matter. However you see Jesus in front of you, just let Jesus be there with you. And then just imagine handing the paper, the list, to Jesus. Just hand him the paper. Give him all the false identities. And watch what Jesus does with the false identities. Just say, Lord, what would you do with this list if I hand you this list of these false names that the world has given me? Watch what he does with the list. Take careful note of what he does with it. Okay? And then when that's done, when he's done what he's doing with the list, take another piece of paper, because you're sweeping your soul clean. You're sweeping your conscience clean of all the junk that takes up so much of your thinking and effort. And now that's your spirit and your soul is empty. And Jesus said, if you sweep the house clean, don't leave it empty. Otherwise, the demonic, the evil will come back 7 times worth. You have to fill it with truth. So we sweep it out, give the false identities to Jesus, and then ask Jesus, Jesus, what do you call me? How do you see me? What do you call me? And write down the first thing that comes to your mind when you ask Jesus that question. Fixing your eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of your faith. Ask Jesus what he calls you. How does he refer to you? And write down what he says. This is the beginning of the journey of identity, unique identity. Whatever he calls you, it's okay. And then keep asking him, what does that mean? How do I understand that more deeply? And begin the journey of understanding that identity. Read it in the Bible, look it up in the dictionary. Definitely tell it to whoever your close group of friends is. And then begin to walk out in that identity. What vocations does that identity excel in? It'll just give you direction. But that's the basic process.
That's awesome. I know some of these guys have done it before with me, so they've gone through that process, so they got to hear it. But I know we got just a little bit of time before we're at the top of the hour. So talk about maybe a next step for these guys, like the Knowing Rediscovered. I think that's just a powerful 6-week series with a workbook that can really like dive into this at ground level.
Yeah. That's what you want to do is you want to get into the we always say the Word of God, the Spirit of God and the people of God. You want to start really engaging with the Word, the Spirit, and the people. People around you that understand identity, that hold you accountable to walking through identity. They don't hold you accountable to avoid sin. They hold you accountable to be who God calls you to be, which is very encouraging, actually. I love being in those groups. So that Knowing Rediscovered at our website, identityexchange.com, is a good introductory 6-session thing. And there's also a series on there now called Energy, which is a little more dense. And it's about another process, like once you're kind of solid in your identity, another process that we call attention, awareness, enunciation, action, which is more of a daily, I do this all the time, dealing with fear that comes up. You know, we're in the real world, things go wrong, things challenge us that we weren't prepared for, and immediately we feel fearful. There's the temptation to creep back into the old false. And so we just need these processes to go through that keep us fit, spiritually fit, just like working out every day. Pretty much every day lately, I've been waking up in the morning and just walking through fear. Like, okay, Lord, and it's just confession, repentance, transformation, truth tell, mind change, form change. Lord, I feel afraid this morning. What am I afraid of? I'm afraid I'm going to meet with this guy and this deal's going to blow up in my face. That's what I'm afraid of. And I'll feel like a failure, and that's a false identity, failure. And then give it to Jesus. Okay, what do you call me? What do you want me to know about this? How should I think about this meeting today? And listen to him talk about it, and then go do what you've gone through in your mind. And I'm telling you, it's just really beautiful. It's really beautiful. The Lord's for you. He wants you to be fully alive and fully free. He wants you to experience transformation and bring transformation to others around you, and that's the goal. So yeah, it's incredible. It's a challenge. It's a battle, but it's worth it.
That's awesome. Well, here let's do maybe a couple of, if any of you guys have a couple questions as we're kind of rounding out things. I know that was got a ton of notes, so it was probably a lot. But any clarifications for you guys that might, just anything on your mind you want to ask Jamie before we let him go?
Wow. I just want to say thank you for sharing. I guess a question, are there some pivotal books in light of all that you shared, especially that experience with the Muslims, that would be good adjunct to this course, that the series that you're talking about, that you could recommend, one or two that are like must reads?
Yeah, one that I really recommend is by David Benner. It's one of the best books I've ever seen on identity. I can't think of the name of it. It's called it's like what's the name of it? Let me look. But yeah, David Benner's book. I think he's not a super famous writer, but this is a fantastic book that he wrote. The Gift of Being Yourself by David Benner, Benner. I would absolutely read that one. And probably any book by Brad Jersak right now is a good one. Jersak, Brad Jersak. He's a theologian that we actually work with him quite a bit. Just from a theological standpoint of hearing God, where is that in the Bible? Those are good questions. And I'm more of a field practitioner than a theologian. So people are like, where is that in the Bible? I'm like, it's the whole Bible. That's usually my answer.
Right.
But he really gets into very deep into. He's got a great book on listening. You'll see his list of books. He's got a great book on listening, a great book on called In. It's just called In. We wrote the afterword for that book, my wife and I. But those are just helpful theologically from when people are like, we've never heard about identity in the Bible and this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, but start with Benner. This is a great book. It's super helpful.
Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Yep.
All right. Well, I think we can. I'm gonna upload the video into our Facebook group, and so I know you guys can ask more questions. I have Jamie's site in there as well for being able to grab that Knowing Rediscovered. You can download that and all the materials. Bethany and I have done that, and it's just, as you guys dive into this, it just, I mean, it's like you do get a whole new set of eyes and ears to interacting with people and seeing intentions, and especially the last 9 months with our business. I mean, as we went through the burn down, as I call it, into the new, I mean, it was literally like, oh my gosh, meeting Jamie and Donna like gave us the training so that we're not getting our own human heads and our fleshly desires involved in all these decisions. And even just over the last few days, just new, there's always something new that comes up, and I'm always like, do I want Wayne's brain, or do I want to hear from the creator of the universe here?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so true. Yeah.
So we just thank you for pouring into us, and I know there's a lot more that we'll be able to glean and be taught from you. So thanks so much, Jamie. We
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for
appreciate
having
you so much. Okay, fellas, thanks for being on. Hit us up in the Facebook group, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks again. Merry Christmas, Jamie, because I know you guys want to travel, and we'll be seeing you in January.
Thank you.
So much.